Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And I must say that the South Africans are giving the rest of the world a good run this afternoon of attendance of our Let's Talk About sessions, and the Americans close behind. It's my absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce my friend Matt. He is one of the most exciting winemakers in South Africa, and I'm certainly looking forward to this afternoon. Matt's actually not from the wine country. He was born in Johannesburg, but saw the light at a very early age and decided to move down to Cape Town to pursue his winemaking dreams. And he finished his degree at Stellenbosch University, which is the foremost university for viti and viniculture. And he worked locally and internationally at Meerlust, which is one of our iconic estates here, but also in Napa at, I'm also going to say, Dancing Hares, as nobody could understand Matt in those days, and also in Saint Emilion. And when he came back to South Africa in 2008, he went for an interview with the then winemaker at Klein Constantia to be his sidekick. And Matt told me the story that he went into the interview with a bottle of wine in his hand and said, "You can't interview me until you've tasted this wine. And if you like the wine, I don't want to do an interview." So the guy duly tasted the wine and immediately appointed Matt without even asking him about any degrees or anything like that. So, and Matt is today only the third winemaker at Klein Constantia since its revival in the 1980s. So quite a record for that farm. He's already been nominated, voted as one of the Drinks Business top 30 winemakers under 40. So you better stay under 40, Matt. And he was Tim Atkins Young Winemaker of the Year for 2016. And from this year on, he is also taking charge of the other farm in the stable called Anwilka, which is in Stellenbosch, mainly doing red wines. And Matt is in the middle of the harvest. That's why he looks so unshaven. So over to you, Matt.
Brilliant. Thank you, Winnie. You're taking all my stories away, so we're going to be 15 minutes shorter today, guys. So thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute privilege just to get out and chat about two of my passions, one being Sauvignon Blanc and the other one I actually have to like, sweet wine. And I'm going to get into balance and of sweet wine and Van der Constance and all the rest. So just to quickly add to what Winnie said, and then to introduce myself, I've kind of landed in a very fortunate position that I've now been at Klein Constantia for, I think, 14 years. And it's one of those things that when the stars align and things kind of happen in your right place in the right time and you've got the right attitude, you can kind of land a gig like working at Klein Constantia. I'll never forget my first vintage as winemaker, and that's literally 3 years of being assistant winemaker under Adam Mason. Klein Constantia was sold, and Adam left to go make wine in Stellenbosch. And the new owners kind of said to me, they said, "Well, Matt, you're really young." I was 24 years old then. And then they said, "You know, if you prove yourself, you can have the job as head winemaker at Klein Constantia." And that was 2012 that I had to prove myself. And I'm still here today. I'm very excited to be the head winemaker at Klein Constantia. And for some reason, they believed in me. And I think in that first year, that's when I was rated by Drinks Business as the top 40 winemakers in the world, young winemakers in the world. And I kind of need to stop talking about being a young winemaker, because I mean, I still look really young, but I'm falling into the category of senior winemakers within South Africa. And that's the great thing about South African winemakers. I think we're a bunch of young guys having a lot of fun, doing our thing, making some really cool wines. And Swartland has been a great example for South Africa in the past couple of years. And I think it's about time that the rest of South Africa kind of catches up to what they've done. And, you know, we're an incredible country. We've got some really interesting niche terroirs. And I believe that we can compete with some of the best wines in the world. And I think Van der Constance has proven that in the past couple of years, that you know, it has reached that level of glory of what it should be. Another thing that I have to say, guys, is if I'm speaking too much rubbish or whatever it is, just unmute yourself or put your hand up and say, Matt, let's get on with things. I am, again, as I said, talking about two of my biggest passions, and I can speak for a very long time about them. I think I said to Melu today, I might just geek out a little bit with Sauvignon Blanc, but I have to do it because that's what I'm about. So the title for today's tasting is, and please forgive me, it's not-so-Sauvignon Sauvignon. And just to go into that, and the reason why I'm saying that is the biggest problem with Sauvignon Blanc is it's called Sauvignon Blanc. You know, Sauvignon Blanc has become very boring throughout the world. It's become a very kind of cash cow product, and people have stopped taking it seriously. I think the likes of Sancerre, the reason why they're still doing really well is because they don't have Sauvignon Blanc in the title. People think Sancerre is Sancerre, they don't think it's Sauvignon Blanc. So my goal, and I think Klankenstanche's goal, and a couple of other winemakers out there at the moment, is to get out there and get Sauvignon Blanc back on the map and prove that Sauvignon Blanc can be and is one of those pure, great, noble varietals. And it's going to take a lot of work. I think we've done too much damage to the brand in the past couple of years. But by working on it and making sure that the terroir shows itself, and we actually make something that doesn't taste like tutti frutti, like a kind of wines, we can do that. So that's my goal, and I'm going to try run through a couple of points today. Ideally, guys, I've got some slides. I'm not going to speak too much around the slides. It's some nice pictures, so if you guys get bored, you can look at them instead of listening to what I'm saying. But I'm going to run through a couple of slides, and I'm just going to try break this up a little bit. Sorry, I've been working for already probably 14 hours today. I've been at work from just after 3 o'clock in the morning. We like to pick nice and early in the early hours of the morning. So please forgive me if I am a little bit slow. So shall I carry on? I'm going to share a slide presentation, and I just have to do this quickly, and I'll see if I can get that right. I'm going to go onto there, and I'm going to chat. Okay, so are there any questions, guys, quickly? So in terms of Klankenstanche, and I kind of said that I'm going to try not to speak about Klankenstanche too much, although I kind of have to when talking about terroir and all the rest. I'm going to try to talk about the wine itself, and we'll take it from there. So Klankenstanche itself, I mean, we're a recreated brand that we talk about the old Constantia, we talk about the old South Africa, and we talk of a history that is 337 years old. But the Klankenstanche today is only was founded in 1986, and a lot happened. And the reason why I say that is they introduced Sauvignon Blanc into Constantia. We had an incredible winemaker by the name of Ross Gower that he'd worked in New Zealand. He brought a lot of his expertise back into South Africa, and he made the 1986 Sauvignon Blanc, which is still regarded as one of the greatest Sauvignon Blancs ever made in South Africa. So we did that, and they recreated the Van der Constance. And I'll get more into that a little bit later, but I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And just to go into my point that I was trying to make, so very often in Constantia, between the founding farms of the original Constantia estate, we often talk about the history, and you walk into a museum and you talk about the old days, and you look at this timeline, and just to run through it, I mean, if you look at winemaking in Constantia or in South Africa, we're very fortunate to boast that we're the oldest New World wine producing region in the world. And it starts off in 1685. And I like to go, it goes blah, 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 blah. And we talk about Napoleon and Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and all the rest. And we get to a point that we're so hung up on the past, and we use the past to often get us into a lot of the doors. And get us into restaurants and get people to kind of get interested in the Constantia Valley. But our vision at Klankenstanche today is more the future, and where we're taking Klankenstanche itself, and how we can, take this wonderful brand that's got an incredible history and take it to the next level and kind of prove itself for what it actually should be. So the history is important, but I definitely think the future is far more important than what that actually is. Are there any questions? Is everyone with me? Shall I move on? And I'm not trying to slay the past. I just definitely think that, you know, where we're going is really important. And then I've just got some cool pictures. And here's a point that I'm going to start talking about more about Sauvignon Blanc. So I've spoken about the biggest problem of Sauvignon Blanc is that it's called Sauvignon Blanc. And, you know, we're at the point that in South Africa that, you know, Sauvignon Blanc is where Chenin Blanc was probably 20 years ago. It wasn't very popular. It's still, you know, it's the widest drunk varietal in South Africa. It's probably one of the biggest white wine made in South Africa. And, you know, we have to start doing something to improve that perception of what it is. So if I can kind of put it into another perspective, and I don't know if any of you guys, I think Chiara is the only one who was at one of my tastings that I presented in London. The best way that I can explain Sauvignon Blanc, and you know, you've got the new world or the very technological approach to making Sauvignon Blanc, and then you've got the old world. And the best way that I've ever explained that, and I quite like to explain that more often, is making Sauvignon Blanc is just like having plastic surgery. And literally what you can do is you can put out a catalog and you can choose how your cheeks are going to look, or your nose or your ears or whatever it is. And at the end of the day, every single person looks just like the next person in Mayfair. They've all got the same plastic surgeon and they've done exactly the same things. And quite often that's what happens with Sauvignon Blanc is we get, you know, we get sidetracked. We try and plant it because you think you can make lots of Sauvignon Blanc and make good money from it quite quickly. Everyone gets a catalog and they literally just page through and you pick the best of the best yeast that you can get and you follow all the technology and you manipulate it as far as possible. And we land up with a generic product that, you know, doesn't taste any different from your neighbors. It doesn't taste any different from someone in Stellenbosch, or it could be someone in New Zealand, because we've all followed the same recipe and we've done exactly the same thing. So that's kind of my approach, or my thoughts around the new world, the new kind of approach to Sauvignon Blanc. And, you know, thinking back when I started off as a young winemaker at Clank and Stancher, I always used to think that making wine and making Sauvignon Blanc was all about having a really good winemaker, and he could kind of, you know, tick all those boxes and make something that is, you know, and you'll always make an incredibly beautiful wine. So I was very fortunate then to work in Sancerre with a guy called Pascal Jolivet in 2013. And it was 2012, sorry, and I worked with Jean-Luc Sorty, who is his winemaker then. And the incredible thing is, you know, Sancerre is it's just so unique. You've got all these, I mean, you guys know all the different parcels of Sauvignon Blanc throughout the whole entire town, and Puy. And he took me out into the vineyards and he kind of said, Matt, you know, look at the soil, taste the soil, get a feeling for it, and then taste the grapes. And we did 6 different blocks. So we went back to the cellar and we tasted 6 different wines from those 6 different vineyards. And they all had that sense of place. And I think that's, I had that light bulb kind of shine, and that sense of place kind of makes sense in that you need to have that uniqueness to the wine. We don't want to make a generic wine that doesn't really make sense. So we brought that back to Clank and Stancher, and we've completely changed our mindset in the way that we do it. So, I mean, the way that Pascal would have done it in the old days is literally just smash it into a tank and hope for the best. You know, it's wild fermentation, it's completely oxidized at crush. You know, there's no enzymes and no additives, and it's just a bit of nutrients during ferment. And I thought that they were absolutely mad when I was there until I tasted the wines. Then the year after, and this is a very big turning point in my approach to winemaking, especially Sauvignon Blanc winemaking. The year after, Jean-Luc Sorty actually came out to Clank and Stancher to help me with the vintage. And we were literally walking through one of the vineyards. I wonder if I can find the block. It's the block towards the bottom here, bottom left. We were walking through one of the vineyards and he was tasting the grapes and he said, Matt, this is perfect for my style of making wine. So we said, well, bugger that. We're going to try and make it in his style. We're going to forget about all the old techniques that we would have been using at Clank and Stancher, you know, the techniques that I was taught at university. And we went back to the basics. So we oxidized the juice at crush. We didn't settle the juice. We put it straight into tank and we let it go for wild fermentation. And it did its thing. We didn't tell anyone about it until it was done and was actually good enough to tell people about it. And when we revealed it to, I guess, our bosses, they really enjoyed it because it had sense of place, it had texture, and it had that X factor to it, which is incredible. So that was the first step into going a little bit more off the beaten track. And since then at Klankenstantia, we have deviated a lot from the past course, and we're now at a point that the Klankenstantia Estate Sauvignon Blanc is 100% wild fermented. It's got a whole lot of different ways that we would make it. I mean, we've got 42 different vineyard blocks at Klankenstantia, and each and every single one of them, by doing this, has got its own personality, or it's got its own site or aspect. And by harnessing or making each one of those sites in its own unique way, you can make something that is unique, that can be blended together to create a further unique kind of blending composition. So wild fermentation, oxidized or crushed, just like we would have done with Matisse. And then it's left on its grow skis for quite a long time. And if I just go into the theory behind it, is often we're taught that, you know, Sauvignon Blanc, and if you go to the New World way of doing things, it has to be protected as much as possible at crush. You know, you have to add dry ice and heaps of sulfur and inert it as much as you can throughout the whole entire process. And all you're doing there is you're protecting all of those unstable volatile thiols. And you're making a Sauvignon Blanc that is very primary kind of fermentation derived in terms of flavors. And you're not really making anything that is authentic to its sense of place. So hence those flavors, after a little bit of oxidation within 6 months in the bottle, kind of break down. And you land up with a product that, you know, a product that they want you to drink. I mean, people want to drink 2022 Sauvignon Blancs right now for that exact reason, is you land up with a wine that is super aromatic to start and it falls to pieces. And so when we went into, you know, the whole approach of going more oxidative but crush, am I talking too much? Are you guys still following me? I can't see everyone, but if I am, please let me know. Anyway, so if we go into the
let's continue, Matt.
We're good, Winnie. Thanks.
We're good.
If I go into the theory behind it, and the way that I like to explain it is, what we've done is we're oxidizing the juice at crush. So we're breaking down all those unstable flavor molecules. We're getting rid of all those volatile thiols right at the beginning. Then we go into a process of a wild fermentation of this beautiful juice. And your ferment is then able to convert these flavors, more stable flavors, into super stable compound. And together with the wild ferment, and I'm not saying that wild ferment, you know, the yeast that you get in the cellar is not always the same. And it's very difficult to get a constant wild ferment going. But the benefit of the wild ferment is that it's a very slow ripening period, not fermentation period. So it starts off very slowly, carries on slowly. And it's not that, you know, with your inoculated yeast, it's very quick to your peak, and then it finishes fermentation very quickly. So your flavor conversion is a lot slower, and you get a lot more complex flavors. Together with your oxidized flavor molecules that are a bit more stable, you land up with a Sauvignon Blanc that is more robust. It's going to last a lot longer, and it's got a lot more texture on the palate. And that's kind of what you want. You want a Sauvignon Blanc that's going to last for 15 years, as opposed to something that's going to break down within a year of the bottle. So that's what we're striving for. The next thing that we're striving for, and I just want to go to this picture over here. So if you look at this picture of Klankenstantia, and I'm now I feel like I'm a lecturer here lecturing you guys on Klankenstantia. But if you look at the picture, I mean, the location is very unique in terms of, you know, we're right in between the Cape Peninsula. You can see Klankenstantia over here. So we've got the ocean on both sides. It's buffered by the ocean. That forms an air conditioning system that brings us back to normal. And then we've got the altitude, and we've got east facing and south facing slopes. And the other thing that we get into, and it's something that we don't talk about enough in the New World, is we don't talk enough about soil. And we absolutely have to do this if people are going to take us more seriously in terms of our wines. So at Klankenstantia, we're trying to talk more about it. And just in terms of explaining it a little bit, we've got decomposed granite, which is 500 to 600 million year old decomposed granite. And we've got Table Mountain sandstone. So to go into soil, I mean, just like flint or selects or chalk or whatever it is in Sancerre, they each have a flavor that brings out that palate composition and the palate. We're trying to figure out what we have at Klein-Constantia. I actually brought out one of our most respected soil scientists to the farm just to figure out where the granite is and where the sandstone is, and he completely threw my thoughts and my theory around it completely out. I always said that the top blocks were high in granite, and hence that's why, you know, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, we make about 6 to 10 different Sauvignon Blancs. But in the highest vineyards, we've got our single vineyards, and they are the most saline, the most flinty, the most spicy in terms of the flavor. So I always thought that the top blocks were the granite, decomposed granite composite sections, and that's why they're so flinty and spicy. He came out, he said, Matt, that's absolutely rubbish. We've got the only pockets of sandstone are right the way at the top of Klein-Constantia, and the granite is all the way down at the bottom. So through the way that I thought about it. So I would usually say granite is salinity, it's spice, it's savoriness, and sandstone is richness on the palate. Turn it around, it's actually the sandstone that brings out that savoriness, and the granite brings out nice richness to the palate. The other thing is, if you look at this map, we've got the 42 different blocks, and just, you know, by working here for the last 14 years, I kind of understand how each and every single block is going to react. So general rule of thumb is we've got the east-facing vineyards that are more exposed to the sunlight in the early morning. And those typically give you more of the tropical, big, full, richer kind of style. And all the south-facing blocks on the left-hand side are cooler. They ripen a lot later. This is one of my best examples. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor here. So we've got two vineyards. We've got a block over here, which is called block 241. We've got a block on the left is actually called 242. Our terroir at Klein-Constantia is so extreme that the block on the right, on the east-facing exposure, is usually harvested in the first week of Feb. The block on the left, we haven't even thought of harvesting right now. It's usually harvested 6 weeks later. So we've got one property, 65 hectares, with 6 weeks of harvesting. That's how extreme the terroir is. And there's literally a 10-meter gap between the two blocks. So I hope that's interesting, guys. So now just to break down the wine in terms of the Sauvignon Blanc that we have, we've got east facing, we've got south facing, we've got full, rich, ripe components. We've got more austere, flinty, spicy characters with all 42 different blocks. You know, we've got high altitude, low altitude, sandstone, granite. We can create a style, a blend that is absolutely perfect. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the Estate Sauvignon Blanc, or the Klein-Constantia Sauvignon Blanc. So I hope that's enough kind of info in terms of study there. I think I've mentioned this too many times, but we are trying to turn Sauvignon Blanc on its head and get out there and say that it is absolutely pure and it should be taken seriously. I'll show you guys a couple of pictures just to show how extreme the terroir is. I always love showing pictures. I mean, so that's our early morning harvest. You can see all the lights coming through and all the extremeness. This is kind of, you know, the gates to heaven. I mean, this block will harvest next week. There's actually block 382 from Klein-Constantia on the right-hand side, which is my absolute favorite Sauvignon Blanc that we make. Beautiful vineyard. And then there you can see the extreme slopes. And you can also see here why they call this one of the most beautiful vineyards in the world. You know, when you guys come and visit, you have to come right the way to the top of the farm with me so that we can explore that. Can I stop there and ask if there are any questions? I think I will stop the slides quickly. Go for it, Winnie.
Okay, so now if you can just go back to the presentation, because Maylee wanted to know what block number that was that the Métis is from. And then can you just show it to us on the big map where you've got all the...
Okay, so Métis is generally from these blocks over here, if you can see my cursor. Okay. So we've got the sandstone on the top, and these are predominantly granitic blocks over here. The original Métis block is far on the right-hand side of Klein-Constantia. We harvested that yesterday, actually, which is quite exciting. I must say, guys, harvest time at Klein-Constantia is the best time of year. I mean, you can see all these tiny little traits coming through in the wines during the fermentation process. tasting the juice, seeing how it is. And it's amazing kind of watching all my little children grow up in the cellar into beautiful personalities. You know, we keep them all separate, and by doing that, you know, we used to in the old days just kind of blend them all together and you land up with a fruit cocktail. By keeping it separate, you can take that little bit of spice and that little bit of finesse and fruit and all the rest at the end of the day and create something special. More questions, Winnie? What am I missing?
Becky Sue, Becky, do you want to ask your question? You're still on mute.
So I was wondering why you got involved with Sauvignon Blanc right now. I mean, was it, maybe you said this and I missed it. Is it consumer driven? Are the winemakers interested? Are they just tired of trying to explain Chenin Blanc to the rest of the world? What are all the reasons?
No, so Klein Constantia since 1986 has always been a Sauvignon Blanc driven farm. So it's been Sauvignon Blanc and Van der Constance. So we're the kind of place that we're sticking to our guns. This is what the terroir offers. This is what the terroir is best for, and that's what we're going to make. We're not a property that's going to follow the trends and go and plant Chenin just because it's trendy now. I think it's up to us to make Sauvignon Blanc trendy again, as opposed to following what the Swartland's doing and all the rest. So long answer short, I mean, this is the perfect terroir for it. The way that we see it. The other thing, Becky says, at the moment, and I hate saying this, is New Zealand has done an incredible job in the last 20 odd years, putting Sauvignon Blanc of that very aromatic style on the map. Sancerre has always been just chipping away, making their style of Sancerre. But I think that there's a phase in the market that consumers are more open to trying something a little bit different. And especially with kind of the shortage of Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand at the moment, it's the perfect time for us at Klein Constantia to get out there and show, you know, we've got that perfect combination of both styles. You know, we've got the seriousness to it, together with being quite aromatic and fruit driven as well.
When you say consumers, are you talking about South African consumers or international or both?
I think it's more international. So Klein Constantia is more of an international brand. We actually only sell 20% of our products in South Africa. And I think a lot of that is through the tasting room. It used to be the other way around. We used to sell most of our wine or Sauvignon Blanc in South Africa, but internationally driven. I don't know, what do you guys think? I mean, how is your perception of Sauvignon Blanc at the moment? And, you know, if you had to count, I actually did an exercise recently. I went out and I said, well, and I asked a lot of people, I said, tell me who are the benchmark leading Sauvignon Blanc producers in the world? And it's very difficult to come up with a list, if you take Sancerre out of it, a list of 10 producers that are doing some incredible stuff. You disagree?
Agree.
Carry on.
Let them think about it, Matt. But Meg wants to ask you something as well, please.
Sure.
Meg?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hi, this is really fantastic. So a question about clones. I know that different clones can bring different styles to the mix. Are you satisfied with what you have in the field, and are you thinking about changing your wood at all?
So we've actually gone through this exercise. We started, and this was the most incredible thing about the new ownership of Klein Constantia, is the farmer sold in 2011 and the new owners kind of came in. So the new owners being Steniak Bacalo, who's a self-made Czech billionaire, Charles Harmon, who's an English businessman, and then we've got Bruno Prats and Hubert Dubois, owners of Klein Constantia. They came in and they said, the most logical thing for us to do if we want to spend some money on Klein Constantia is start in the vineyards first. So we went through and we literally pulled out anything that didn't work, if the clones weren't right or the row direction wasn't right. And I think in the old days, we were more focused on making a lot of wine instead of making good wine. So we fixed all that. We planted the best of the best clones that we could get. We changed the row directions to kind of work for that, you know, sun exposure from morning and afternoon sun. And we also pulled out, we used to put in a lot of Semillon into our Sauvignon Blanc as well. And if we want to be Sauvignon Blanc leaders of the world, we can't then say that, you know, we want to blend some Sauvignon in to make it a little bit better. So that was incredible that they came out and they said, well, let's focus on the vineyards first. Let's get our farming right. Let's get the clones right. So we're not organic, we're not biodynamic, we're not conventional, you know, but we're using all of those practices to make better wine, if that makes sense. And then they invested in the cellar. And then finally, they invested in the tasting room and rebuilt the tasting room. And then the last phase was to put in a bistro onto Klankenstein. So we kind of got it right that we started in the vineyards and we finished with what doesn't really matter.
Yeah, very fortunate to work with such people who are willing to make that investment first.
It's incredible. I came up with the title. I was sitting tasting all our wines with Hubert de Bois last week, and I've been very fortunate that, you know, when I became winemaker at Klankenstein, I had Bruno Pratz and Hubert de Bois behind me. I could literally just WhatsApp them or give them a phone call. There's no other winemaker in the world that's got that capability of you know, years of experience. Sorry, I cut you off there, Alex.
No, I guess the other question I have is following it into the cellar. I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing the time here, but I'm very, very interested in your wild ferments. And are you confident that the yeasts that are coming in, I'm assuming you're not doing malolactic on these wines, but in any case, the cultures that are coming in are actually ambient, or do you have vestigial cultures in your cellar? Like, I mean, if you've ever used cultured yeast, it's going to be around, right?
Yeah. So my answer to that is I'm not really concerned which yeast is landing up in the fermentation. And this year was point and proof in that the first blocks that I brought in, we literally left them in the tanks for 3 weeks and nothing happened, and they've only just started to ferment now. So that's kind of, for me, proven that it is from the vineyards. But then other blocks, you know, that have come in, they've started fermenting after 2 days that they've got into the cellar. So the thing that I'm not looking for the wild strain, the thing that I'm looking for is that very small strain of yeast or yeast culture starting off, and you land up with a fermentation that is very long and slow, as opposed to something that you're putting your inoculated yeast or your developed strain of yeast in there. Your ferment is absolutely perfect. It gets up to the peak phase and then levels out and then finishes ferment really quickly. We landing up with a very long, slow fermentation process that I think is kind of better for it. You know, you're developing more flavors. We're also adding, we don't add any diammonium phosphate or ammonia to our wines. We're adding 100% organic nutrients of vitamins and amino acids. So it also stops that very quick fermentation process. And your flavors that are developed, you know, I think good things take a long time to make. The flavors are a lot more evolved and complex from that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for the question,
Matt. And then Keith wants to know, can you please talk a little bit about hyperoxygenation, the yeasts and the enzymes, some of which you've already touched on.
Yeah, sure.
What is your view on Semillon Sauvignon blends?
Okay, so in terms of hyperoxidation, I tried to get into that earlier. So for Sauvignon Blanc, you know, I was taught in university, you know, I've been taught by every winemaker that I've worked with in the past is keep it inert, keep it, you know, don't oxidize it, protect the flavors. We want to break down those flavors. We want to get rid of all those. If it's going to break down before fermentation, it's going to break down in the bottle. So we'd prefer to get rid of it before the fermentation, that we can land up with a flavor that is more stable in the bottle. And then we can make a serious Sauvignon Blanc that's going to last for 30 years. So, you know, I didn't get into the two schools of thoughts in South Africa, but, you know, you've got those guys that are chasing those styles. They want that wine to jump out of the glass. But a lot of those wines, my favorite joke is the only thing that can make your mother-in-law smile. And that's purely because of the acidity, and it's like rough and she's got to grit her teeth. But that's unfortunately the style that you land up with that, and it's got nothing to back it up on the palate. Whereas if you are oxidizing the juice, you are creating, and I have to get back to, you're planting Sauvignon Blanc in the right space or the right region, you can create something special from it. So hyperoxidize, in terms of enzymes, you know, a lot of winemakers work by recipe, and every single block that comes in, they say they want to have it at a super clean turbidity, so aim for 120 NTUs. It just means that you don't get any reduction during fermentation if you add nutrients at the right time. We're kind of saying, bugger that, get it dirty, get it fermenting dirty. You get a lot more flavor from that. Not to mention, we also need the yeast that's in the lees as well. It does go reductive, but there's that fine line between managing reduction, and I have to get into this. We oxidize the juice, we make it wild ferment and all the rest, but as soon as it gets into that tank and it starts with the fermentation, we are as technical and as clean as we possibly can be, because we want to make a super stable wine. It's not like we're trying to make a orange, funky, natural wine or anything like that. So if you manage it right, you can then create something super special from it. So a bit more lees just means you're going to struggle with the reduction. You just have to apply better winemaking techniques. You have to taste the tanks 3 times a day, because it literally can change within an hour with dirtier ferments. And Winnie, sorry, what was the last question? I hope I explained those enough.
Yeah, and what is your view on Semillon Sauvignon blends?
Can I just chip in? Sorry you can't see me, but my bandwidth is very low. So I'm Matt from Keith Granger. Yep. Semillon Sauvignon blends. Let me say, perhaps the finest white wine I've had in my life, Chateau Haut-Brion Blanc. Yeah. About 53% Semillon and 47% Sauvignon Blanc, and many great white Bordeaux, Pesavillon, Young Grave, this wonderful Semillon Sauvignon mix. Do you think that people in South Africa just don't understand them? Is it not where your head is? What's your view?
Yeah, so I think it's you know, I think it's that case of, you know, do you make a blend of a Bordeaux blend, or do you make a straight varietal? And it's also a case of right wine for the right place. And if your Semillon is incredibly amazing in the spot that you have, then why not make it? You know, go for it. My issue with Semillon for us at Lankenstanche is it was good every 4 years, once in every 4 years, and the other 3 years they were just filler uppers. So if we're just putting in Semillon just to put it in, it didn't really make sense to us. The other thing with Semillon is I believe that Semillon needs to be barrel fermented and barrel aged and blended with a tank kind of aged Sauvignon Blanc, and you get a lot of complexity from it. And that does create a super amazing style. But for us, you know, our goal is to become Sauvignon Blanc leaders in the industry. And we can't become Sauvignon Blanc leaders in the industry if we're blending in a little bit of Semillon to make it better. It doesn't help the story of, we just don't believe in our own product then, if that kind of makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Thank you so much, Matt. Just before I shut up, you are still dry farmed, aren't you?
We're still dry farmed. We've got a lot more biodynamic blocks at the moment. We've got a lot more organic blocks. It actually came to so the dry farm part of it is we had a lot of rain this year, but the biodynamic and organic part of it kind of came back to haunt us, purely because we struggled with a lot of rot and mildew this year, which was not great. But you have to do it if you want to make something special.
And just finally, before I shut up then, what then would be a typical yield for your Sauvignon blocks?
What yield? Sorry, I missed that.
Typical yield in hectolitres hectare for your Sauvignon blocks.
So, yes, in terms of, I mean, we harvested a block today that we got 0.5 ton a hectare, which is not great. But and it wasn't fun waiting for all those grapes to come in. We spent a whole day and we only made 4.5 tons of grapes, or processed 4.5 tons of grapes. But we average anything from 6 tons a hectare to that 0.5 ton a hectare. I think we're averaging about 4 to 5 tons per hectare. We have some incredible slopes, and I just want to get to that picture and something like that. You don't get many grapes from this. We also don't want to make too many grapes from this. We also don't want to make heaps of wine. You know, as soon as you make heaps of wine, you have to discount your product to sell it. We're not New Zealand here.
Yeah, I was going to say, compared with Marlborough, where they're getting 10, 11 tons,
yeah,
quite common.
But Marlborough is completely flat and easy to farm. Yeah, so, and you know, our recovery from our liters per ton recovery is literally 500 liters a ton, and that's it that we use for the first label. Anything harder than that goes straight to a second label, and we don't even consider using.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
No problems.
Matt, and then there's a question from William. Do you perhaps know how much South African Sauvignon Blanc is exported to Japan? Because he's unable to find it in any of the shops that he deals with. Do you know anything about the Japanese market?
No clue. I'm sorry. Well, I'll have to find out. We'll probably have to contact WOSA about that because they'll have better stats on that.
Yeah. And then Neil, has your question been answered? Because we already spoke about Semillon.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
And
Great.
Angela, do you want to ask him your question? Angela?
Okay, now I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can
gotcha.
hear you.
Okay. Matt, I was asking about fermenting fermenters. Do you use either amphora or cement eggs, which are very popular these days, and they add to the texture?
Yeah, Angela.
Which I think is an important thing in Sauvignon.
I'm all for texture, provided that it comes from the terroir as opposed to the fermentation vessel. I'm completely against cement or amphora. And I have seen examples of it that it really does bring out a bit more minerality, if you can call it that, or texture. The issue is that's not coming from where it's made. It's made in the cellar. I'm quite a lazy winemaker. I like to let the wine do its thing while I can chill in my office and chat about Sauvignon Blanc. You know? But we, Angela, so what we have tried to do is we have numerous tank sizes. So we've got tanks from 450 liters to 30,000 liters kind of thing. And ideally, we'd like to keep everything separate in those tanks as opposed to do anything too. I've also tried, you know, I've fermented Sauvignon Blanc in red wine tanks where we do pump overs throughout the whole fermentation just to see what happens. Yeah. We go all out, but we just, yeah, I am for wood if you can get the right amount of oak in it, that it doesn't taste like oak. And I think that's a sign of a great wine, is if you do put it into a barrel and it doesn't have too much expression of oak.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
No problem.
And then Becky just wants to know, that picture that we're looking at, is that bush vines?
That's bush vines. That's part of the 382 vineyard. The section behind it is trellised vines. So half of the block is trellised, the other half is bush vines. If you guys haven't tasted Clankenstantia Block 382, you have to go out and find it. I think it is probably the only wine that can compete with Puy Fumé. It's stunning. So we only make one barrel every year. It's a pet project, but you know, we do release a couple of bottles. Or come and taste it with me.
I'm going to back Matt up. That to me is the wine, the Sauvignon of Clankenstantia. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
it is indeed.
Yeah.
And Claudia said she'll go and check on those Japanese figures for us. And then William, do you want to ask your question about the exports?
Yes. Well, in reference to my initial question about Sauvignon Blanc, I was surprised that I couldn't find it anywhere in Tokyo. I went to quite a few shops. And of course, Chenin Blanc is fairly easy to get. That's what I'm drinking right now, just to sort of be in the geographical ballpark. The other issue is, I guess, political. It seems as if the South African government developed a kind of hostile stance to the wine industry during the COVID crisis. And I was wondering whether that perception is valid and whether things have changed and what the future holds for exports.
Look, in terms of, to answer the question about getting wines to Tokyo, I think there's so many wines in the world, and it's such a competitive market, and it takes a lot to actually get your brand into a lot of the wine stores and all the rest. And it also takes us going out there to represent the brand, and unfortunately we kind of spread too thin. Van der Constance, I'm pretty sure you would be able to find in Tokyo in quite a couple of places, but unfortunately the Sauvignon Blanc isn't. And then, you know, in terms of COVID and the restrictions and all the rest, it definitely wasn't fun. It was probably one of the toughest 2 years that we've had at Clankenstantia. I don't know if the government is hostile towards the brand, the wine industry, and I don't want to go into too many politics around it, but it was a no-brainer, stupid decision that they made. We're sitting with a population that are very heavy drinkers, and there's a lot of abuse and all the rest because of the alcohol. So they're just trying to free up hospital beds and prevent hospital beds being kind of taken by alcohol abuse and all the rest. So there is that stance, but it really did hit the South African wine industry really hard. We fortunately at Klein Constantia, we're export focused, so it didn't hit us as hard as a lot of the other producers. I think it's going to take another 10 years for South Africa to recover from what has actually happened. There were government grants, but it wasn't enough to kind of get everyone by. I think also, fortunately, in South Africa, a lot of the brands are supported by some very wealthy people. So I think it's just cost some wealthy people a lot of money to keep the industry going. And it's also turned into a situation of survival of the fittest. I think that one issue in South Africa is that we do have too many wine brands. We have too many hobby winemakers out there. So it has kind of separated the weak from the strong. And it's maybe a good thing, or it's not a good thing. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of years and see who survives from it. The restaurant industry was actually hit a lot harder than what the wine industry was. There's very few. There were a lot of restaurants that closed down in the past 6 months or year, which hasn't been great.
Matt, can I cut you short there? I just want Mark Allen to ask his question, and then we're going to move on to the Vin de Constance.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Matt,
Hi, Matt, big fan. Couple of things. Age of your vines, how old are they?
So we vary. Our oldest block of Sauvignon Blanc is planted in 1986. We're probably averaging, and the crazy thing is, when I started at Klein Constantia, all these, and I still think of them as super young blocks, but the blocks are getting on there. We're probably averaging about 16 to 18-year-old vines at the moment. Unfortunately, our vines can't go much older than 30 years in Constantia. We're almost too warm in the winters, so the vines don't actually last. We're too wet and too warm in the winters, so they don't last as long as what they probably should.
Okay, and then the oldest wine, the Sauvignon Blanc that you've tasted, I mean, in your library, what is your? So talking about 30 years, and how long are they actually lasting?
So the unicorn wine for us was always the 1986 Sauvignon Blanc and the 1987 Blanc de Blanc. And I think up until about 5 years ago, we were still opening the 86, and it's such a beautiful wine. But we had a window of probably, and the window got smaller and smaller and smaller. Initially, it was half an hour. You could pour that bottle of wine and everyone absolutely loved it. Now it's probably about 5 minutes, and it's just turned into more of an oxidative style. But since then, I discovered the 1995, and I think the 1995 is just as good, if not better, than the 1986. And that's drinking beautifully at the moment. Unfortunately, I drank all of it within 1 year, so there isn't really any of it left. So if you find some, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, Matt. Sorry, Mark.
Sorry, just you talk. I help out my daughter's restaurant, so I pump a bunch of wines, including yours, from my cellar, just to introduce people to Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa, and it's been a big hit. There's Mulderbosch, I've got Dalachia, I've got your Klein Constantia, and they're loving it. So, given that Marlborough's sucking eggs right now, what are we doing globally to really push the South African Sauvignon? Are you doing it as a concerted effort, or are you doing it just as an individual?
Look,
because it's an opportunity of a lifetime.
No, it is. It definitely is, and we have seen that at Klein Constantia. So we're pushing really hard from our side as an individual producer. South Africa is also very fortunate to have the Sauvignon Blanc Association, which is probably the strongest association out of all the wine varietals out there. They're doing an incredible job to push South African Sauvignon Blancs. It's not about keeping secrets, it's about sharing all the ideas and concepts to make the other guys better, if you can. So it is strong, but we do, and fortunately with the Klein Constantia Estate Sauvignon Blanc 2021, it came out at the perfect time So it's rebranded, new look, new everything. And there is this huge shortage of Sauvignon Blanc in the world. So it's doing very well for us. It's exciting times.
Just on that point of Matt's about the Sauvignon Blanc Association, I'm actually going to be doing a Sauvignon Blanc top 10 tasting in London, Mark, on the 10th of March, the 10th of June. 10th of June, I'm doing a tasting at High Timber. So we'll be showcasing all the top 10 wines there. Matt, we've got a few minutes left, and you cannot go without talking about Van der Constance.
Okay, let's get to, sorry, I know I always, that's a cool picture if you look at that. That's up in the powder blocker. I'll get to Van der Constance now, Winnie. All right, so the topic of this part of the talk is balance, and it's something that I'm trying to get to a lot more when we talk about sweet wine. Unfortunately, I think I deal with very difficult varietals. Unfortunately, sweet wine is just too sweet. And that's why very few people are drinking sweet wine anymore. You find that perfect occasion. It's almost like the problem that Champagne or MCC or Method Cup Classique or whatever it is had. Everyone wanted to drink it in New Year's. Sweet wine, everyone thinks that you need an occasion to drink it, and you need to drink it with dessert and all the rest. We're trying to change that perception, and Van der Constance is the perfect wine to do that. So in the past, cheapest 10 kind of years, we have pushed as far as we can to almost create a sweet wine that tastes dry. And we've pushed the boundaries as far as we can. And I think the 2018 and more so the 2019 that's going to come out later this year is at that point. The sugar just brings out flavor and power. It doesn't have that sweetness. So we've tried to figure it out, and all that we've done is we've figured out how to farm it properly. We've figured out how to vinify it properly, how to work with it in the cellar, and get all the flavors coming together. If you have that balance between sugar, alcohol, and acidity, it's absolutely perfect. Often they're too sweet, and there's not enough alcohol in it, and definitely not enough acid in it, and you just have a flabby sweet wine. If I do go into Van der Constance, and I'll try and explain that a little bit more with the processing and the winemaking behind it. The greatest thing about Van der Constance, other than the history that it has, is it is one of the most unique wines in the world. It's not made from botrytis, and that's purely because we don't want to make another Noble Late Harvest. We don't want to compete with all those botrytized wines of the world, your Sauternes, your Tokais, or whatever it is. We want to make a style of wine that is from this region, made in the same way that we would have done in the old days, made from Muscat de Franciquin, and most importantly, made from raisins. So you can see the picture that I have on the presentation. It's kind of the evolution of the Muscat throughout the season. And our harvest, guys, can last for anything, from 1 month to kind of 2.5 months kind of thing. The latest harvest we've ever had was actually the 2012 vintage. We finished picking in the last week or the last couple of days of April. So it is a very long harvest if you consider that we also make bubbles as well. So what we do, and I'll just run through the winemaking process of it just to give you guys a bigger picture, is we harvest, and I don't know if I have, you can see the guys out here, see those beautiful bunches. You can see that balance, and I might go back to the slide over here just to explain it. We harvest throughout the season, so we'll start picking in February, and the guys will go out and they'll pick the high acid composition, so they'll get the berries or the bunches that are greener and more solid, and then we go out throughout the whole entire season. We've got a specialized team that you literally say to them on that day, look guys, I'm looking for 30% raisins or 40% raisins. And they'll go out and they'll pick that for you. And you get to a point that you've got numerous components of either high acid or medium acid or low sugars, high sugars, super high sugars. They even go out to at a point and they pick individual raisins. And they do 1 kilogram to 5 kilograms per person per day of raisins. And that can form the heart and soul of Van der Constance if we need it. So each and every single component has got its own end goal, and each and every single component is made in its own way, whether it's made just like a white wine, or we macerate it cold on the skins for 2 weeks, or we ferment it on the skins. Then we land up with a point that we have up to 30 different batches, I then start the fermentation, and our fermentation can last from anything from 3 weeks to 6 months to a year. And during the fermentation process, we constantly blend. So high acid stuff with high sugar stuff to get to that point where your yeast cannot survive in an environment. So it's, I don't know if anyone's heard of the Dell's equation. It's literally an equation that dictates your amount of sugar and alcohol that the yeast can survive in without the osmotic potential kind of killing those yeast cell walls. And rule of thumb, that's 14% alcohol with 165 grams per liter of sugar. We'll blend throughout the season until we get to a point that our batches are within that ballpark. And then this is quite important, is the fermentation stops by itself when you get into that kind of region. And if it doesn't, I've got my secret weapon of the raisins that we harvest, the individual raisins. We make an essentia from it. And I use the essentia as kind of a sugar spike. You smash it with a bit of sugar. Your fermentation goes really quick for a bit and your yeast kind of dies off. It's kind of like drinking a Red Bull. You're super tired within a couple of hours. It stops that ferment and it gets that sugar to alcohol balance within the way that it should be. The other aspect of balance that we're looking at here is it's the balance between primary, secondary, and tertiary flavors. And I always think about it as a pendulum. You start off with primary flavors on your far left, you've got secondary in the middle, and you've got tertiary on your right. In the old days of making Van der Constance, and I remember coming into Clankenstantia, we changed the style a lot to a lot more of a secondary style from a tertiary style. And everyone said to us that we were mad. We were changing this beautiful wine that's super historic. And, why are we breaking something that's not broken kind of thing? Why are we changing what people have done in the past? And our goal was to bring out that freshness. So we took it from a wine that was very tertiary and we brought it back to just off a secondary kind of characteristic. So we brought back the finesse, we brought back the perfume, the kind of more elegant kind of characteristic to it. And by doing that, we brought out a lot more lightness on the wine. And that's how we got it to a point that it is a sweet wine that almost doesn't taste sweet and can go with any occasion. And I think I was getting to that in the beginning, is you now don't have to have a sweet wine at the end of the meal. You can have it with your starters, with cheese, goat cheese salad, or you can have it with foie gras, or you can do anything with it. You can have it with your mains, you can have it on its own as a dessert by itself. It is such a unique and diverse wine that it can kind of do that. What am I missing? What do I still need to explain? I mean, we also changed the way that it's barrel aged. It used to be 4 to 5 years in the barrel, and then it just completely went into that tertiary characteristic. We now have a cellar that is built for Van der Constance, and we've perfected the barrel age. So we do 1.5 years in 60% new oak in 500 liter barrels, and then we put it into 4,200 liter foudre, and you get very fast oxygen uptake in the beginning and evolution happening in the beginning. You put into the foudre, and it's kind of like putting it into a time capsule that it stays kind of inert and doesn't age very quickly. Is that enough info on it? I mean, you can kind of see on these pictures the team and the attention to detail they put in there. That's the perfect raisin bunch. You can see all those perfect raisins. Muscat itself, the reason why it works, in the old days, I mean, it would have been Muscat de Frontignan, it would have been a bit of Chenin Blanc, it would have been Semillon, and it was Pontac that went into the old sweet wine of Constantia. Muscat for us today, and the reason why we put it in is Muscat has very thick skin walls. It's resistant to botrytis, and it is able to raisin out like this, which makes it perfect for making a great sweet wine. If we go through on the sorting table, you almost have 2 sortings. So the guys will take out super ripe raisins and we'll put that to one side, and then we'll leave the kind of 50-50 composition where it's raisined and whole berries to go through the pumps. And there's I think that's my assistant doing punch downs. That's kind of the old technique, and it works really. It's crazy to see this with a sweet wine, but it really works quite well. What am I missing? Other than a constant seller.
Okay, Matt, thanks very much. I just want to ask you, Mark wants to know why you don't make a noble late harvest anymore, such as the Sauvignon Blancs of old.
We we only want to focus on one sweet wine. So it's kind of like bringing out a reserve sweet wine. It's saying that the Vin de Constance isn't the best that we can produce. So we're focusing 100% on Vin de Constance. Mark, it's not to say that we're not making Noble 8 harvests. I still have made quite a couple of vintages. They're just tucked away in the cellar, and that's more for, I don't want to say personal consumption, but like friends and family consumption. We never make a lot
when
of
one
them.
of us come and visit.
Yeah. So the last one I made was a Riesling, and it's incredible. Yeah.
And then finally, Becky Sue wants to know, when will the 2019 Vin de Constance be available in the US? And then when do you suggest drinking it?
2019 will be out in September. We've just finished with the blend now, or we're almost finished with the blend. And we're really excited about it. I think, you know, we've been trying to improve the quality of Vin de Constance by like 0.01% every time. And I think, you know, all that hard work has eventually got into a point. 2019 is super special. Not to say that the 18 wasn't. So we're looking forward to the 2019 release. What was the other question? When my harvest brain is killing me.
No, and how long is it? How long can it be drunk? What is the drinking window?
Drinking window is anything from now until 2152 maybe. I don't know. It's a hell of a long time. But what I'm getting to now is the 18 now is only just started to show its full potential. Unfortunately, we have to release the Vin de Constance with the negotiants. Not unfortunately, it's actually quite a nice system. We're the only South African producer to be sold on Le Plus, and it gets released at that time every year. And the wines are almost just not at their full potential when we actually release them. I think 2018 is drinking perfectly now, and 19 will do exactly the same. So mid 2023, 19 will be showing well. And just to get to the ageability question, I mean, we've drunk the 1821 sweet wine Constantia. It's beautiful. We've had the 1885 sweet wine Constantia. It's still perfect today. And that's the beauty of sweet wine. It lasts forever.
Thanks, Matt. And I just want to say that now that you've talked about the Riesling, Angela, Melu, and I are all coming around to come and our hands are up for that one.
Anyone's welcome.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring it to a close here. I just want